Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar on all things global screening and payroll. As always, we will wait a few seconds before we start to allow everyone to get into the room. There will be time at the end of the session, as always, for questions. So if you can try and put the questions into the Q&A function on the ribbon bar at the top of the screen, that would be super useful. And I'll make sure I put those questions across to Kate and Charles at the end of the session. Also, feel free to jump in on chat, say hello, introduce yourself to everyone else who's on the call, and we'll get started shortly once the joining numbers start settling down. I can see we've still got some people coming in, although the numbers are starting to slow down now, so probably in a good place to kick off. So thank you, everyone. Welcome to this webinar today, which is Understanding Global Payroll and Screening, Navigating Compliance Globally. So in today's session, we're going to be expanding out our focus on considerations for businesses when accessing global talent pools, as well as discussing payroll. We're also going to bring into the mix the complex world of background checking and screening. Excuse me. So as we know, I think as businesses now are looking to hire more and more talent globally because of the talent shortages that we experience across the globe in different sectors, it's becoming increasingly difficult to properly verify the identity of those people, where they've worked, especially when they've been living in different countries. It's also a whole host of other complexities that can be brought into this, in such as the legislation surrounding how you verify identity in different countries, and so this can get quite complex, and it can create quite a bit of risk. And the danger is also that you can also create quite a muddled candidate experience. So hopefully we can talk you through that today. We'll also touch on AI. I don't think we do a webinar without mentioning AI at the moment, but it's certainly due to have an impact on this particular part of the market. So we'll talk through a little bit as to what extent AI is a help or a hindrance when it comes to verifying identity and career history. So the topics that we've planned for you this afternoon are, first of all, we'll look at identity fraud and global talent mobility and how you can manage multi-language and cross-cultural issues through that process. We'll take a look at global payroll and how this can interrelate with screening. We'll then move on to the AI and automation topics to talk through how this can really help from a candidate experience perspective. And we'll talk about how candidates can also use technology to break the process. So very much could be a two-way street here with both parties using AI for different reasons. We'll then finish off looking at the evolution of global payroll offerings and what to be asking an employer of record if you are looking to partner with one. And then, as I mentioned, we'll finish off with Q&A. So do please put questions into the Q&A piece as we go through the topics, and I'll make sure we pose them to Kate and Charles when we wrap up. So today's webinar is brought to you by Giant Group. We are a leading contingent workforce management business. We help MSPs, RPOs, recruitment businesses, and end hirers globally with a full range of services, including payroll and background checking. I am genuinely delighted to be joined by two of my favourite colleagues today. I'm really looking forward to hearing from their expertise on the topic. So firstly, Kate Ellis. Hi, Kate. Kate is Chief Operating Officer at Giant Screening. Kate has lived and breathed the evolution of the screening industry for the last 17 years, managing teams delivering global screening solutions to some of the world's largest corporates and enterprise staffing firms. Kate leads the operational delivery here at Giant, managing a global team delivering screening services to end hirers, as well as our enterprise recruitment partners. I'm also delighted to be joined by Charles Dorr. Charles focuses on helping clients access talent globally and compliantly using Giant Global's international payroll services. Clients include UK recruitment businesses placing internationally, as well as end hirers that are looking at trying to hire talent from overseas. I'm Dan Haslam. I'm Chief Business Development Officer here at Giant, and so I'll be the host for today's session. So we've got a list of preset questions that we're going to pose to Kate and Charles, and that'll allow us to weave through the topics. Again, as I mentioned, at the end of the session, there'll be time for Q&A, so please do drop your questions in as we go through, and we'll get round to them shortly. So let's kick off. Let's first begin then by looking at screening across borders. Good afternoon, Kate. Welcome.
Hi, Dan. Nice to be here.
Great. Yeah, I know Giant Screening has seen a significant increase in the number of screening checks that are now involving multiple countries involved in the process and involved with the candidate. Can you just sort of give us a bit of a run through as to what the key considerations are when running a global screening program, please?
Yeah, sure. I mean, without stating the obvious, the world is a very big place. And you're right, we are seeing candidates with multi-jurisdictional address history, meaning they, within their history of addresses that would be in scope for a check, may have 2 or 3 different locations in the world that they've lived. So the key to kind of managing that is understanding the risk and the compliance tolerances within those global screening locations. So that could be, a mixture of what products are available, how we access those products, so what types of data is needed, what types of consent is needed to actually access those products. But also what is actually permissible. So legislation can get complex on what you should and shouldn't be doing, what types of roles. I mean, if you look at the UK, here is a great example. We've got 3 types of criminal record checks across 3 different jurisdictions. And there are complex rules around what can and can't be done for each of those levels of check. If you kind of think about that globally, then that complexity is really massive, and what your program and what your technology really needs to look at is how do you adjust your tolerances, set your tolerances, understand what you want to be doing globally, and then how do you actually make that happen? How do you collect that information from candidates and have those partner networks and vendor relationships across the world to kind of actually go and get those results in a compliant way, of course.
Yeah, understood. And so obviously you've got that challenge to face at Giant Screening. How can a provider like Giant look to use technology and translation tools or networks to sort of reduce errors and delays on this?
Yeah, I mean, it really does start with the technology, and all of this said, what we also have to do is balance the user complexity, so the end user who needs the results of the checks and being able to kind of translate and understand them with the candidate experience, because this is complex. A candidate may have been through screening before, may have never been screened, and not really understanding of what this process is and what it requires of them. So what we've been working really hard on is up front within that journey. So when we're collecting data to run screening for a candidate, the most frictionless process is to get everything we need in that journey. And I think historically, if I reflect back in my career, a lot of the time this global problem was a manual problem. So, a candidate would fill in their address history. We would know, in the UK, we need to do X, Y, Z, or X number of employment references, etc. But then if there was sensitivities or global nature in the program, someone would come in and review and be like, okay, there's an address here in India, we're going to need this. There's an address somewhere else in the world, it's going to need this level of consent or this form or this piece of data. So what our technology is really doing now is doing that in front end. So you avoid that friction with a candidate. So as soon as a candidate's putting in an international address, it's cross-checking the tolerance of that program to say, is this something that we want to run? Equivalence of from the main screening requirement. And if so, what do we need to do that? So it automatically presents that candidate with the data collection that's going to enable that check to run. So, what we're really doing is avoiding the friction downstream, avoiding unnecessarily, back and forth. And then we integrate or fulfill that with our network across the world.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think all the businesses that are on the call today understand that speed is essential when you're looking at onboarding and bringing candidates in for a variety of different reasons. So if you can get all the information up front, then that absolutely seems to make sense. Are there any other considerations that people should be thinking about in terms of that process?
Um, Obviously language. So,
Yeah.
any modern screening process or screening technology needs to be multi-language available for candidates. So our system is you can flick into any language that that candidate wants to complete the journey in. But also, taking that a step further in a global landscape, anyone using that system or anyone interacting with that system needs to have that same accessibility to it. So just like any other modern kind of digital internet website environment, you need to serve up that journey in whatever applicable language. So, whilst that can be said for the candidate data collection, complex legal consents, you need to be able to give it to the candidate in a language that they can consume it in. We've taken that a step further because actually, if you're expecting someone in another country to come and interact with your system, you need to be able to talk to them in that language. So
Yeah.
even for a UK program, if a candidate has history in Poland, as an example, and you're expecting a Polish university or a Polish entity to give you a reference, then of course they need to be able to interact with the system in Polish. And again, reflecting back, there's ways and means this has been achieved in the past, language templates, but actually the best solution is that we can get to candidates, users, and references in any language they need to interact with.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point because obviously it's easy to focus on the worker experience here, but equally, if you're going off to other companies in other countries, that those guys need to be able to understand the request that's coming through. But also, I know you've got software only customers that use our platform where they've got users that are actually, driving the systems. It could also be the case that the user's sat in a completely different country. So you could have three different people speaking three different languages through a process. So pretty interesting that you've managed to get the system to support that so that it's almost translating for the three parties. Um, Okay, excellent. And you mentioned standardization on the last point. Do you think there's going to be a trend towards standardization in this approach by employers, or do you think employers are always going to have to look at a country by country approach?
I think we would love there to be more standardization, but that's just not the reality. This is multi-region country legislation. There are some countries which are becoming digitalized. There are some countries which are really, really behind on any kind of digital records. And in those countries, there are different ways and means to get those results. So, whilst some kind of standardized program can be achieved, it's actually driven by technology. It's driven by really good implementation of programs. So this is what we want to have as an output, and this is how we want to see that replicated across the world. So we want to have the same risk tolerance in this country as this country. But the products that can then be actually launched and fulfilled are going to be taken care of to keep that actually compliant, to make sure that those checks are permissible, those checks can be run. So whilst the goal is a standardized output, I think it's actually the technology behind everything that is making that feel seamless and
Mhm.
standardized. But actually, it's incredibly complex, and everything happening in the background is taking care of that complexity.
Yeah, I'm sure after all your years in this market, you're well versed at being the swan with the legs kicking underneath to make sure all the knitting's done and linking everything together.
Yeah.
Okay, so what advice would you give to employers then on communicating clearly with candidates in multilingual processes so the candidate experience remains positive? Because it's easy to lose sight of that when you're starting to look at all these different systems and different languages.
Yeah, so we've spoken about the main screening system, but actually there's a ton of support that goes behind that. And you know, I think any good screening program has empathy at core and understanding of enabling candidates to do what they need to do so they can get to the end result. Because ultimately, this is someone's job, right? This is someone wanting to be able to work, going through a compliance process. It's
Yeah.
never particularly fun for anyone. So I think what the best programs are is making sure that those points of friction for candidates, or those things that are always the top hitters on, I don't understand how to do this, or I'm stuck, have support available, but that support spans languages. So we've spent a lot of time working on candidate hubs that support the screening process, which is, a digestible place to go and find any information that they need, frequently asked questions, videos, short explainers, just to help them through the process. And of course, any support needs to be available in that language, live chat, etc. Just so the candidate understands all the way through from submission to completion, what's going on and what support's available.
Okay, cool. So I think we've covered language complexity. So let's now move on to look at identity and fraud, which is obviously it's very topical, and we know that there seems to be more and more instances of this taking place. So, what red flags should providers watch out for when they're verifying ID documents across multiple countries?
Yeah, I mean, digital ID is in the UK a massively hot topic right now, as you say.
Yeah, yeah.
It's it's actually not new for screening as a concept. We've been working with digital identity here for a number of years now, and it kind of does underpin screening as a whole, because unless you've really verified the identity of that person, you're at risk for the rest of the process. So, confirming that person and their identity up front is always underpinned everything that we're going to do in the screening process. But as we have, implemented digital ID and kind of ingrained it into the industry, there's definitely more risk of fraud coming up. The smarter our technology gets, the smarter the fraud can get, if you like. So what we really need to be doing is staying a step ahead of that. So, as an example, in the UK, share code fraud is really rising at the moment
Mhm.
as a method to kind of gaining employment. And whilst historically the share code check could be done on government websites, it's absolutely critical to verify that person and the identity behind that share code. And that can be done now with technology. So you're doing biometric checks on the person as well as the share code to marry everything up and mitigate risk on those types of things.
So it sounds like technology is key. That's coming through straight away. Technology is being mentioned in every part with these additional checks, balances, and verifications that are needed. But I suppose, given that we've said at the beginning that speed's key, how do you try and balance the need for speed through an onboarding process with all these additional fraud detections that you're having to run?
Yeah, I mean, speed, it comes hand in hand with technology. The more automated a process and the more technology is used, actually, that's going to support it. But I think what we do see is barriers to entry for that technology. So, this is tech. So candidates need to be able to use it. Candidates need to be able to have the right kind of smart equipment to use it to go through the process. It needs to be available across multi-devices and more importantly, for those candidates that do have barriers to entry and kind of may not be as technologically adapt, then we need to support them. And that's been a big learning through digital ID. How do we give tools to those people and support to those people who have never done this kind of process before and don't use technology in the way that everyone else may, in this kind of modern world. So that's where we've really focused on kind of making it as straightforward, putting it within our journey and making sure that we know the frequent fails and we've got content around that to help candidates through.
Okay, great. So thanks for that, Kate. Just finally, then wrapping up on this first topic, then what role do you see governments and regulators playing then? For example, we've mentioned digital ID because it's topical. How do we see them having an impact there on frameworks around how that works, or even how they're going to share data cross border?
Yeah, I mean, there's a massive disparities at the moment, really. There are some countries that are already really embracing digital ID. There are others who are very resistant and actually actively against these types of products. So, really it's down to us as an expert provider to help people understand the markets, what's available and what's compliant in each jurisdiction. Because as I mentioned at the start, there are real differences across compliance and appetite for these types of products. I mean, even closer to home, right? Things could really shift and change here really quickly.
Yeah.
And I guess the advice really is just to stay close to the regulation and get prepared because, whatever your view on it, like we're going to have to embrace whatever changes come our way.
Yeah, and I was just thinking that as you were speaking, I suppose the other thing here as well is that you could have a situation where you've got an end hirer who's got a particular, screening requirement that they happily run in the, couple of countries, and they just expect that to be cascaded out through the globe if they make global placements. But of course, it's not always that simple if the country that you're operating in doesn't necessarily have that data, or there's some prohibition around you actually running some of those checks. I suppose you're also educating back up the chain to say, well, actually, look, we can have solutions here that can get as close as to what you need in this country, but there are some gaps, and it's just an education piece, feeding that back into the client as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's huge, and that's why I say an implementation of a global program. A lot of the risk and work up front is just going to create the tolerances of things and equality globally that really make for a successful program.
Yeah, great, Kate, fascinating, thank you. Charles, if we can bring you in here, then I think it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on how you've seen the evolution of screening services from the point of view of an employer of record. So, these employer of record businesses have really flourished over the last few years. So, how does sort of inaccurate or incomplete screening data have an impact from a payroll and an employer of record side? So, I'm thinking, risks around compliance, or if that can then start filing, going through into tax areas as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's an interesting question. I mean, we're really at the I guess the intersection of compliance and payroll accuracy and legal risk when we're talking about this. And so firstly you've got the compliance risk, right to work, immigration breaches. If the screening data is wrong or incomplete, the EOR can kind of unknowingly employ someone illegally. And then you're exposing both the EOR and the end client to potential fines, audits, reputational damage. You've got risks around employment classification. So again, incomplete background information could cause misclassification, again, leading to incorrect payroll setup. Local labour law obligations, again, missing details, age, working time, medical checks where required, all could cause breaches of working time, health and safety, or statutory leave laws. And then really, if you look at the almost like the secondary part of payroll accuracy risk, incorrect tax residency status. Yeah, if nationality, residency, or address data is missing or inaccurate, the EOR may apply the wrong tax rules, leading to under or over withholding of income tax. The same for social security. If the wrong social security setup is in place, if you're say missing a PPS number in Ireland or equivalent in other countries, again that could prevent correct registration with the authorities, leading to penalties or delayed filings. You could also have effects on benefit entitlement, sick pay, pensions, statutory leave, all can be affected. And you can even get to a point where maybe you've got duplicates or mismatched records. And again, inaccurate personal data can cause those mismatches within government systems, again, resulting in blocked payroll submissions. So, getting the data right is really, really super important, and it can have big knock-on effects in lots of places for the EOR.
Yeah, and that's what obviously the purpose of an EOR is actually to protect that end client, or if we're engaged via a recruitment business, that recruitment business also from risk. So Yes, there's a load of payroll conversations around that on misclassification, and we've done plenty of webinars on that topic, but also employment law, and a lot of that would stem from potentially not getting the screening correct, as you've highlighted. So obviously, in your world, it's always multiple countries involved, and you get some weird and wonderful deals put in front of you. So, what sort of system integrations are you looking at between screening and payroll to get this process right?
Sure, absolutely. When you're running payroll across multiple jurisdictions, one of the most critical factors to success is making sure that the screening data flows cleanly and accurately to us. Ideally, without rekeying or manual workarounds. So the more you can almost limit human interaction, the better, as it's going to reduce your risk. So integrating with screening systems is really important for reducing that risk.
Yeah, yeah, and I know that's a trend. We've got a number of employer of records that albeit we're a competitor in your space, but we're also a lot of interest there from them looking at the global background checking capability, because they see the benefits and they don't want the whole process to slow down. It wouldn't be great for an EOR to have a slow onboarding process because they didn't necessarily have the right screening partner in the mix. So obviously I know you're working hard on the joined up approach now between Giant Screening and Giant Global to help clients reduce the risk. Can you just talk us through that a little bit more?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the Giant Screening and Giant Global both run on the same in-house precision system that Giant's been developing over the last 30 years. So although we're separate divisions within the same group, the actual core system that we use is the same. And it means then, of course, that it can accurately share data between our divisions without any errors occurring. So it really is that kind of that one platform solution that we can have between screening and global.
Yeah, which I think is really, really good. If you can have that, then the less integration, the better the data flow. Although I suppose also equally, we know that some end hirers can sometimes insist that a particular background checking process is used. So there's a potential in the future, I think, for integrations there as well. But I think most clients will take the two services if that's on offer and it's a nice, slick and quick process. So then, casting your eyes forward, then crystal ball now, Charles, what do you think is there in the future for us? So, global clients are demanding integrated platforms. Do you think, however, though, it's likely to be specialist providers that will win the day because they're niche specialists in those component parts of screening, payroll, and compliance? What's going to win an end-to-end platform or specialist providers?
Sure, it's a tricky one, as you say, to look into the crystal ball, and so I'll nicely sit on the fence and say, do you know what? I can absolutely see the benefits of having everything under one system, but I think it's likely that there will always be kind of niche specialist providers out there that are focused on just one specific area. So I imagine there will be a combination of services that will be around for a while at least. But I think there'll be a leaning towards kind of a one system solution, but with perhaps some very niche specialist providers that can link in or bolt in through API or whatever to kind of have those specialists still involved.
Yeah, I think we all understand the benefits of a streamlined integrated process, but the reality is it's what's the best solution for the customer. And it could be that there's a requirement for a niche specialist of part of that, or it could be it's a volume opportunity, and speed and data flow is key. So I just think it always goes back to understanding what the client requirement is and then sort of working back from that. But I think it's certainly a very, very, very fast-paced market in this respect. The trend does seem to be generally businesses looking at building a solution that can give them an end-to-end onboarding, screening, payroll platform. And I mean, platforms in themselves are very topical. There's a lot of looking over shoulders from recruitment businesses at the moment to understand how the platforms are growing and progressing, and whether or not they need to lean into that sort of model, or even if they can collaborate with those platforms. Because everyone ideally is looking at that seamless experience. And Kate was mentioning about, how friction in a process can slow down background checking. That equally applies, obviously, from a payroll perspective, and can be even more emotive. Anyway, let's move on to the next topic then, which is starting to look at AI and automation in background checking. So, Kate, if I can come back to you, a lot of providers, obviously, in the market talking about AI-enabled background checking and screening. In your view, in reality, where is genuine AI having an impact or could have an impact, and actually where is it more really about good, slick automation in a screening context?
Yeah, you're right, and it is absolutely, again, one of the hot topics that everyone's looking at the moment. And I think the reality is it's both. It's both things. What the industry is looking towards AI for right now is not really any difference to what we expect of a really strong screening employee. And I think the first parts of that is gaining momentum right now, is looking at the kind of back office processes that are very repetitive, particularly slow, particularly kind of errorsome, or manual, and asking whether AI is something that can solve that problem for us. And really, that doesn't mean taking away humans from the process. It just means that those humans can focus on things that are real value add, like where AI is not as strong in kind of judgment, decision making, candidate experience, etc. So I think traditionally in the industry, we've always looked at automation through a kind of repetitive process automation, looking at very simple things that can be run through the likes of RPA or kind of just repetitive task simulation. But that really leaves gaps for adding in that value of kind of critical thinking and where AI can come in. And I think that's used correctly in the right types of processes, it's going to become really powerful. From all respects, really, reducing error rates, because AI is not going to get tired. It's not going to make the same kind of human mistakes that can creep into the process. But supported by people, kind of not in place of, but very much in tandem with value add efforts.
Yeah, and I suppose thinking about background checking in particular, in essence, it's a very logical process. You can map out the steps, what happens if this data is available or not, and you move through. So it lends itself to automation, probably, in terms of really getting into the nitty gritty and creating the system, as you discussed, to think about that and make decisions to increase speed. So yeah, I can see how it's going to play a big part moving forward. Just a quick reminder to everyone on the call, if you've got any questions, as Kate and Charles are calling, if you had any problems previously with background checks, or you want to ask any questions for the guys to pick up, please drop them in the Q&A, and we'll make sure that we pick them up at the end. So coming back to you then, Kate, in terms of AI specifically, thinking about how it might improve accuracy rather than just speeding up administration. Have you got any examples where you think it could really have a genuine impact, or is currently having an impact for your business?
Yeah, sure. And we spoke earlier on digital ID and ID fraud, and today's kind of AI tools in the market making those things actually kind of easier to do. And I think that is the case throughout the screening experience. So generating or being able to generate fake IDs, fake documents, fake education certificates for any degree in the world is becoming easier, frankly. It's kind of more accessible, if you like, to kind of create those. So we have to stay ahead in screening and rethink our traditional methods, because I think at source and digital records are definitely where we want to be, and AI and technology is gonna help kind of bring in those records and use them, if you like. So just at a very basic level, AI can spot subtle anomalies in IDs that a human wouldn't be able to, and actually wouldn't be able to expect a human to know what every watermark on every passport across the world looks like, or what equivalent of MLZ code or etc. So you can put AI in the process to actually detect and alert on those kinds of things. But as these processes are growing, we need to actually kind of stay ahead of them. So if we're looking at complete employment verifications, traditionally, especially in the UK, we've looked at source as being the most powerful, and that remains. Getting records at source is the best and the most risk-free way of getting results. But actually, the secondary things that we've traditionally done, looking at documents, looking at pay slips, looking at employment certificates, is less risk-free as the technology and AI kind of evolves in market. So we really need to be a step forward, and already at Giant we've been doing it for a number of years now, but things like integration with tax records, direct source information, pulling information in terms of candidates' real history of where they've been paying tax direct from government sources like the HMRC is the kind of the better way and the more kind of future-proof way of delivering results.
It's funny, isn't it, when a few years ago, when that ability to be able to do the referencing quickly off the open bank data was fresh in the market, it was revelationary for everyone. But now it's kind of like, okay, everyone can do that, and we're on to the next thing. Like the pace of change and the way that the technology is like moving through everything is frightening, really. And to that point, is there any risk, do you think, of actually over reliance on automation, because you're effectively then losing some human oversight? So is there an argument actually to say that actually you need to retain that? What are your views there?
Yeah, and actually there are loads of places where you wouldn't want to rely on this type of technology. I think candidates value real human support and empathy, especially in a process like getting a job. So AI tools like chatbots and things like that are great for quick answers on things that are needed, but not so great when candidates get themselves into complex situations or have difficult problems to solve. So I think, we have to balance that. Here's some great quick information from a kind of live chat bot with actually here's a connection to a real person who has empathy and can help you and understand you and give you the answers that you need. So, I think he is complementing your process with AI rather than replacing.
Yeah, no, I hear that. So you're not a fan of backing out all the human interaction. You think that's still necessary in terms of resolving queries and moving people through the process, yeah?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. It was interesting. I heard Randstad, someone from, I think it was the MD of Randstad in the UK, talking about this as they'd implemented AI for a lot of some of their customer service facing operations, and they still had humans left. But what they'd found was that the humans were then left dealing with the really, really, really difficult cases to solve, and actually that had a sort of an impact on staff retention, because the staff were constantly dealing with really, really complex cases as opposed to sort of getting through some easier work just to break things up. And I know it's not one of the set questions, Kate, but you can just understand that that could be a potential impact there as well. You've got to keep people comfortable on getting the work done, even if they are left with the trickier cases.
Oh yeah, and that's always been a kind of consideration, even with automation, is actually over and above the turnaround time gains, the labor cost reduction, what you're creating is a better job. You're creating,
Yeah.
who wants to sit there and click the same box 100 times a day? Variety and engagement in what you're doing as a work is important, and actually that's where we start really. Who's clicking buttons they don't need to click, and let's get that
Yeah.
out of the process.
Yeah, no, you spent ages watching the guys on the system to see what they're doing, what they're clicking, and trying to remove those. And that, in essence, is the automation, isn't it? If you can get to a point where there are no clicks, then you've got a fully automated process. But I suspect that it's probably nirvana, or at least for now. So, from the candidate's perspective, how do you think AI-enabled tools can improve their experience without it feeling particularly intrusive to them?
A candidate shouldn't really notice apart from the positives. So, they should see their checks completed accurately, more quickly. They should be able to get support quickly when they need to, but actually have human interaction when they need to as well. So, you know, the nirvana is that the candidate doesn't really know. And actually, they have a better experience because we're not asking them to go and find a certificate from 20 years ago in the grandmother's attic or, whatever traditional means that kind of used to happen. These things are seamless and digital, and we can use different techniques where we need to. So it should just feel smoother.
Yeah, understood. And do you think candidates would trust the process more or less if they knew that AI was involved? It's maybe a loaded question.
I think trust is transparency and understanding. So, a candidate would trust the process as long as, you're clear on what the process is, that
Mhm.
privacy is respected, you're following all of the local laws and they're comfortable. So I think the key is clear communication on what's happening.
Yeah. Great, fascinating. Thanks, Kate. So we're getting to the end of the topics now. We're going to move on to the final topic, looking at the evolution of global payroll offerings and what you should be asking an employer of record if you are looking to partner with one. After that, we're going to move on to the questions. I can see we've got a couple in there now. If you have got any questions that have occurred as we've gone through, then submit them in and we'll make sure to put them to Charles and Kate. So coming to you, Charles, then you've obviously worked with lots and lots of different types of businesses over the years in your world of global payroll. How do you feel the solutions have evolved over the last 5 years in particular, I suppose, especially with the rise very quickly of remote and hybrid workforces post the pandemic?
Yeah, sure. I think there's kind of two parts to this. There's been a steady journey of development in global payroll towards employed solutions and away from self-employed, and that's really been driven by governments of countries wanting workers effectively in a PAYE box for the sole reason that they gain higher levels of taxation and social security. Um, I mean, 10 years ago, maybe a little longer, in the industry, it was all about, can you just get someone paid? That was all that was wanted. That developed into, can you get them paid and make sure that they are paying some tax? So there was some level of compliance. Developed further, again, on the back of changes in legislation, into making sure that they're paying tax correctly and maybe in the country of work. So again, it
Mhm.
got more and more strength from legislation, and now it seems to be very much more around making sure that it's the correct payment structure as well. So AOR or EOR, and
Yeah.
as I say, this is all being driven by governments wanting to gather greater levels of taxation and security, and so bringing in legislations to help do that. Um, then separately, very much off the back of COVID and the pandemic, you had the global boom in remote and hybrid working. And it really created an overnight need for people to work from home as a standard requirement, as opposed to an occasional need. Um, and that kind of developed when it was seen that this could work. Um, then there were questions asked: if I'm at home, do I need to be at home in the same country, or could I actually live and work somewhere like Spain and still be just as productive? So COVID definitely brought a boom into that kind of hybrid or remote working. And what you see now is a bit of a combination, really, of the two. You've still got governments wanting to put people into essentially that PAYE box, but you've got workers really wanting that flexibility in where they work and how they work. And so you have almost got a little bit of a battle going on for a flexible, mobile workforce that wants to move around, wants that freedom, wants the ability to be where they want to be and to deliver their services the way they want to, fighting against almost the government saying, no, I'd like you in that employed box and paying as much taxes through as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. There's definitely a tension there. Kate's obviously spoken quite a bit about how giant screening are leveraging technology and automation to improve that process. Have you any experience in that, or any examples where you think this automation and an AI piece might actually help address some of those challenges in global payroll?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, when I started in this industry, global payroll was around people and spreadsheets. It was labor intensive. There weren't really systems. Maybe this is just showing how long I've been in the industry for, but there weren't sort of systems or platforms that were used in global payroll. So it was all around just people.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, just earlier this week, I was with some of our colleagues, and we were talking about how, back in the day, processing expenses in a UK umbrella was about someone actually physically sending the expenses through the post and them coming through, and then you having to kind of look at them and file them and all that sort of stuff. So, the technology has definitely helped develop the way that solutions can be provided. And I think for myself, when I joined Giant, the fact that this precision system that we've developed in house had been working so well within the UK, but then had the ability to do global as well, was a bit of a revelation, because then it's all around automating processes so that it's not as labor intensive with people. It's not about lots and lots of different spreadsheets. It's all actually systemized and automated, and then you end up with a system that really doesn't mind if it's or care rather if it's paying one worker or 1,000 workers. So I think where I'm seeing the big change with technology is the ability to scale. And that's something that is, I think, really come on in the last few years.
Okay. Yeah, good. So I was moving on then from the technology element and just looking again at compliance and reporting. We've spoken a bit about certainly the regional differences that you can have from a screening perspective and how that can bring in more complexity. I'm sure that's the same from a global payroll perspective. So what are the sort of areas that companies often underestimate the complexity here?
Sure. Look, the reality is that every country is different when it comes to the way they operate. In Europe, most countries, you've got your tax year that's January to December, but compliance and reporting can be very different from country to country. If I take one example, when you pay someone in Germany under an EOR model, you've got until the 15th of the following month maximum to pay an employee. Whereas in the Netherlands, if you run a payroll, you have to run a payroll at least once a month, but the day can be agreed and set between the employer and the worker. And I mean, that's just one very small example, but there are lots of differences and nuances from country to country that EOR providers need to be aware of.
Okay. Not that I want to make your work any trickier when you've got RFPs coming through, but I think it'd be beneficial to the audience just to try and get your views on, when an end hirer or a recruitment business is looking at partnering with a business like Giant Global, then what are the sort of questions that should perhaps be asked here to evaluate the capability of that employer of record? And also, if you can wrap into that, like what are the capabilities that people should be looking for when they're thinking about choosing a partner?
Sure. I think for me, it's always been around working with people that you trust. You want to make sure that you can look the supplier in the eyes and feel that they know what they're talking about, and that you can trust that they're delivering a service to you that is compliant. I think beyond that, you've also got to look to work with a company that's got the ability to match your requirements, whether that's
Mm-hmm.
to do with volume or particular locations. You want to work with a company that you feel has got the expert knowledge to know how things operate in different places. And ultimately, what you're looking for an EOR to do is to provide a level of safety and security and compliance for you, so that you can operate around the world without having to pump in loads of time and effort yourself. So I think it's definitely around, making sure that it's a company that you feel you can trust, that it's someone that matches the requirements that you have to deal with the volumes that you're operating in, and also has got that expert knowledge.
Yeah, and in terms of questions that companies could ask to evaluate, the capability of that employer of record, any recommendations to the audience?
Sure. Yeah, look, it's for me then it's around documentation. Um, Again, the reality is that any company could say that they're offering a compliance solution, um, but where you can perhaps investigate a little bit further is to then ask them to back that up. Um, so I would recommend working with companies that are very happy to share documentation of what they've done to actually prove compliance. This is something that happened in the industry many years ago, where you would have people saying, "Yes, I'm a compliant provider of EOR services," but then if you actually dug underneath what they were doing, there could be things like split payments going on, where funds were being sent to another country, and only a small amount of the funds were being paid in the country of work. And so by asking for your EOR providers to actually provide the documentation to back up what they're doing, I think is a powerful question to ask them, because if they can't, then that should be your first sign indicator that something isn't working the way that you think it is.
Yeah, I think we all get a sense that governments globally are starting to look a little bit more at how these global payments and global workers are processed. And we've seen, the news about many different misclassification cases in lots of different countries. So it's certainly, the risk is increasing. And so it's something that you definitely need to be playing with a straight bat. On that point, then, is there any sort of particular common pitfalls or red flags that you would flag when companies are selecting an employer of record?
Um, so I think, as I mentioned, the reality is that most EOR companies provide their service range through a combination of their own incorporations and a partner network. So I would always recommend digging a little deeper, to see how is the solution being delivered. Where there is an extra partner in a chain, that's normally not so much of an issue. But I've certainly seen solutions in the past where there's a partner with a partner with a partner with a partner, and all of a sudden you've got a huge long chain of different companies that are then, you've got one company at the very end delivering the service, and the reality is that service levels are only going to go one way when you have multiple people involved, and also costs are only going to go one way, which is up, because you've got multiple people all needing to take a little piece of it. So I think certainly for me, not a kind of a red flag would be to, yes, talk to your providers around what coverage do they have, but then how are they also getting that coverage? Because as much as there are providers out there that say, we cover 180 plus countries around the world with our EOR solutions, I doubt that they've got 180 of their own incorporations. There'll be a partner network in place, which is very much the normal way of working. But then, interrogate your EOR partner on, right, so how many other partners are there below your first line of partner network? Is it just one, or is there actually a whole long chain there to get down to the eventual employer of record?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And you said it earlier, which is spot on. Trust is key. Well, trust will come from transparency. So anyone out there pretending that they've got their own global solution, we know is absolutely not the case. It's about being transparent and then giving assurance as to how that partnership network works to make sure you deliver the service. Just conscious of time, because we've got 5 minutes left and we promised we'd get to the Q&A. So thanks, Charles. Let's move into questions now. So we have got a couple that have been submitted. So I think this first one's going to be for you, Kate. In your experience, which country has the strictest screening requirements that often catch businesses by surprise, and how can companies prepare for that?
It's kind of multifaceted. There's many countries where kind of tolerance of data is lower. So actually it's more difficult to get what you need, and you need particular proof that it's like permissible for the role that you're hiring. So, if you look at, and actually this drills down to specific checks. So in some European countries, whereas we do a credit check quite openly for a screening in the UK, there are countries in Europe where you would not be able to do a credit check, or you would only be able to do a credit check if it was someone with financial responsibility in a company. So, there's layers of complexity in the products themselves, but then there are countries with whole data mandates. We're covered by GDPR here across Europe, but then if you look at the US, there's the FCRA legislation, which screening needs to comply with. And actually how you do that and how that's done in different jurisdictions, different states is different. And actually it's not something that you would want to be caught out doing wrong, because the fallout of doing that is massive.
Yeah, they like a bit of legal action in the US, don't they? So I'm sure screening, if you get that wrong, can be definitely open to action as well. So I think US probably is one to be wary of, making sure you've got the right processes. Charles, we've got one for you here. So if we want to expand into a few countries at once, what's the best way to balance speed, cost, and compliance without stretching the team? Good question.
Nice, simple answer. Give me a call. I can sort that out for you. Look, again, look at the EORs in the marketplace, and look at the coverage they've got, and then you just want to marry that up with where you're looking to expand. The reality is that companies like ourselves at Giant Global, we are there to help organizations expand globally without having to put in huge amounts of time, effort, and money to set up operations. So that's exactly what an EOR is there to do. And you just want to make sure that what you're doing is going with a company that has got the coverage that you need and has got the expertise to deliver. And then it should be a quick process.
Yeah, we did a webinar last week with Sean Moran from the Aurora Group, and this came up there. And I think companies will often look at strategies which are do we buy technology in and do it ourselves? Do we build our own solution from scratch, or do we borrow or outsource? And the important thing to understand there is that won't be a static decision. That will evolve over time. So actually think about maybe starting on one place and working with a supplier who can take you through part of that journey. So I know, for example, with you on payroll, you can pivot to be an employer of record, but then offering a managed service, or with screening, there's a managed service that can be offered, and then you could have your guys running the software if that's what you wanted to do. So I think it's just thinking that through, because you don't have to make the decision of the ultimate solution. Doesn't need to be where you land. First of all, it'll be on a journey as you sort of learn as you go. Okay, well, we're coming up to time now. Kate, thank you very much for taking us into the complex world of global background checking. It was fascinating to hear from you, and similarly for you, Charles. It's interesting to hear how you're linking into screening as well as staying focused on your knitting on compliance, payroll, and paying people on time. Thank you to the audience for joining. We really appreciate it. As always, we will follow up with a recording. And if you've got any questions or queries on the topics, then come back to us, and our experts would be more than happy to help. And in the meantime, enjoy your Thursday afternoon. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you.